I'll just pick that up again. I just bumped my computer with a coffee mug that is about the size of a Buick. So, well, Sartre writes about, of course, the waiter. We talked about that example, who seems to be in a play. He seems to be not really there, but he's acting the way that he thinks a waiter is supposed to act, and he's actually become the role. I don't know if you know who Stanislavski is. Stanislavski was a Russian theater producer, director, drama coach, whatever. He created what was called the Stanislavski method. Up until Stanislavski, the plays were utilizing a very sort of artificial way of conveying emotions. You see, people striking these poses. Well, yeah, I mean, to us that looks a little ridiculous, but to 19th century audiences, when you saw that particular pose, you knew exactly what emotion was being conveyed. Stanislavski said that theater should become more realistic, and by doing that, the actors should prepare by examining the experiences that they have, their own personal experiences. What do I really look like when I'm angry? What do I really look like and sound like when I'm in love? What do I really look like and sound like when I'm amused? Whatever. You remember what you were doing with your body and your voice and so forth, and you recreate that, and it's very lifelike. Okay? Now, even Stanislavski said, when you lose the distinction of where you begin and the character leaves off, drop out of the play immediately. Wash it out of your mind, because that way lies madness. A Japanese heavy metal artist who I admire, in a recent interview, said, and she was asked about, her stage name is Sue Metal, and she was asked, well, Sue Metal, tell us who Sue Metal really is. And she said, Sue Metal is a character I play in a musical. That's how I have to look at it, she said, and she's not very much like I am, really, and I can't ever, for my own good, I can't ever lose the line where the character I play leaves off and I actually begin. Alice Cooper, who was a heavy metal artist previously, in an interview said, look, if Alice Cooper were a real person, I would not even want to know him because he's a dangerous guy. And as for myself, that's not who I want to be. Most people who know me think I'm nice. Okay, well, you've got a difference between what you play and what you don't play, what you play and how you really subjectively feel your life, how your life presents itself to you authentically. Okay, authenticity is when you stop alienating yourself. Authenticity is when you realize this role is not me, that role is not me. I'm the actor, not the role. Okay, authenticity is crucial, because if you don't have authenticity, your life can't have meaning. Authenticity is the assertion of the reality of your existence. Okay? Now, the reason I've included some stuff on colonialism, Frantz Fanon, and Jean-Paul Sartre's introduction to Frantz Fanon's book, is because essentially colonialism is, Fanon argues, and Sartre agrees, colonialism is simply bad faith institutionalized. Okay, and I recommend that you listen to that video and ask yourself, how many ways do I see around me that kind of bad faith? Okay. When we read at the beginning of the course Simone de Beauvoir, I included an optional excerpt from her book, The Second Sex. Now, she's probably best known for that book, The Second Sex, which is a book of feminist philosophy. And she sees the whole issue about sexism as being an issue of authenticity versus bad faith. Now, in the readings assigned for today, you'll note that Simone de Beauvoir says, look, you can't have it both ways. If the human condition is such that we are caught in this tension between our facticity and our freedom, and authenticity and meaning comes from embracing that freedom, then that freedom, that meaning, is part of the human condition, and you can't turn around and say, for me, yeah, but not for you, not for those people, not for those people. Yeah, frequently, that's exactly what happens. Well, you don't have the same authenticity that I have. Not just talking about subjectivity here. You don't have the same crucial intrinsic freedom that I have. Why? Because your skin's darker. Or how about, you ever heard this one? Because you're younger, you're a kid. Well, as they say, there's no fool like an old fool. Or, you're too old, I can listen to you. Or, you're too poor, or you're one of the rich. And we know they're evil. No, you got it wrong. It's the poor who are evil. No, you got it wrong. It's etc., etc. It's the uneducated who are evil. No, it's the highly educated who are the evil ones. Excuse me, you're just stereotyping. Okay? You're not looking at and listening to real people. You're creating an illusion. You're either loving or hating that illusion, depending upon whether or not you identify with it. And you know what? If you're identifying with that illusion, with that stereotype, with that myth, that's bad faith. That is a refusal to actually embrace your freedom. So, but you can't embrace your freedom without allowing others their freedom. Okay? Our facticity is externally observable. Our transcendence is our inner freedom. Embracing our inner freedom, our transcendence, if you will, the possibility of transcendence, being for itself, as Sartre would put it. We are, Sartre says, condemned to freedom. Now, in a world where people claim to be fighting for freedom and valuing freedom, what sense does it make to say we're condemned to freedom? With freedom comes responsibility. I can't blame it on my environment. I can't blame it on history. I can't blame it on this, that, or the other thing. I have to say, I can make choices. Regardless of how I have been situated in this life, I have to deal with it, with the situation I am in. But I have choice. Well, yes, there is no element of our facticity that defines, delimits, dictates who we are. We choose who we're going to be. When people who are deeply invested in bad faith define themselves in terms of a role that's been assigned to them by others, they're very likely to resent people who refuse to do that, to say, no, I'm going to make choices. This is not who I choose to be. You can't, why do you think you have the right to make that choice? Look at me. I didn't make those choices. Joseph Campbell, the scholar of comparative mythology, talks about an incident where he was in a restaurant and there was a family and parents were quarreling with the young children and with each other. One of the children decided he didn't want to finish his hamburger. And the father said, eat that hamburger. You're going to eat that hamburger. And the mother said, don't try to make him do something he doesn't want to do. And the father said indignantly, you have to do what you don't want to do. Look at me. I never did anything I wanted to do. And Campbell doesn't say that to mock them. I mean, he doesn't recount them to mock them, but simply to say, isn't that tragic? And you can look at your life and say, I never did what I wanted to do. Everything I do is something that I feel like I have to do whether I want to or not. And guess what? I'm going to try to impose that on others too, even my own children. Rather than saying, you know what, I should respect you enough as my child to want you to be able to have a degree of meaning in your life that I didn't have. Rather than, who do you think you are? You can't be better than I am. It's a famous passage in Mark Twain's novel Huckleberry Finn, where Huck's long absent father encounters him and discovers that Huckleberry Finn can read. The father, of course, can't read, but the kid can read. The father is furious. Who do you think you are? You're not entitled to be better than your parents? Well, gee. As de Beauvoir puts it, the tyrant wants the subject who is being tyrannized to believe that they're not entitled to make their own choices, to believe that they're not intrinsically free, to believe that the meaning of their life does not hang upon actually making conscious choices, but rather that it has to be some sort of obedience so that you fit in. No wonder Heidegger was so worried about what mechanization, the machine age, would do to the human spirit. Parts have to fit together, they have to move in unison, they have to blah, 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 blah. Where is the role for human freedom? Well, it certainly is a problem. It certainly is something that has to be dealt with. So, bad faith, inauthenticity. You may be lying, or you may be ignoring, or just unconscious of the conditions that are convincing you that you don't really have freedom of choice. You can't really choose. The denial of freedom. And if society wants you to fit in, to play some pre-assigned role, they're not going to be telling you about freedom of choice, not really. I mean, they may repeat those words as if it were some sort of holy incantation without for one moment believing in it. Social conditions encourage us to identify ourselves with our jobs. There's an upside to that, meaning that you're going to make your job into something that you're going to do as best you can. And you're making a contribution to the collective life of whatever unit you live in, whether it's community, nation, whatever. Martin Luther King once said, "If you are a street sweeper, sweep those streets like the heavenly host above have sent you to sweep the streets, and will rejoice, saying, here was a street sweeper." And of course he means that somewhat humorously, but it's like, you know what, we're all contributing. One of the virtues of Confucianism, to simplify this a bit, but one of the virtues of Confucianism is to be serious at your job. Now, what does that mean? It doesn't mean don't laugh in the office. Don't laugh at work. As one comedian said once, you can't laugh at work. Your boss will tell you, we're not paying you to have a good time. Well, of course. Well, if you're productive and you're doing good quality work and you're a good team member with your fellow workers, why shouldn't you be happy? Okay. Well, I guess if you decide that you really ought to be happy doing your job, you may quit. You may say, you know what? I don't mean that I can't have fun. I don't mean that I have to have fun every moment. Either one. What I mean is, I know other people are depending upon me, and I can take that seriously as a way of acknowledging their value as humans. I can do my best as part of this collective team. One of most film historians would say one of the greatest films of all time, Akira Kurosawa's The Seven Samurai. An important subtext is that the seven samurai were recruited to teach this village of farmers how to defend themselves, because they know they're going to be attacked by a small army of brigands who have attacked them in the past. This time, it'll be like locusts. They'll be wiped out. They won't survive the winter. So they go beg, basically, seven samurai to come and defend them and train them. That involves especially training them how to defend themselves. What most film historians would say is that they're being taught to put their self-interest to one side and work together and think about the common good. Which is something they're having difficulty doing. But as they learn to do that, they draw upon their ability to care about one another and to work with each other. Eventually they survive. At the end of the film, there's a famous scene, the so-called rice planting dance, where they are putting rice plants into the newly flooded fields, while accompanied by drums and flutes and chanting and singing as they're doing it. This is how they've coordinated their efforts, which shows that actually it was not alien to them at all, that they could work together, they could care about what they're doing. So, being an authentic person with a meaningful life doesn't necessarily mean you're saying to hell with everyone else. the New Left movement during the 1960s in France. There were many people who thought that the government was actually going to go down. The students were, and workers had joined together and were barricading the streets in Paris and so forth. And there was never much chance that it was going to be a successful revolution. But one of the leaders of the students, Daniel Cohn-Bendit, often said, people would ask, in this utopian vision of what society can be, who's going to collect the trash? And he would become indignant, typically, and say, you don't know that trash collector isn't capable of more. Which doesn't answer the question, but who's going to collect the trash? Maybe you should say the trash collector is doing an essential job. And if he's doing a good job, he should be rewarded, rather than looking down on the trash collector. Now where have we heard that before? Oh yeah, you know what? I have a white-collar job, so I'm superior to you. You collect the trash. No, you're no better. You make choices. You create your life. And you are not in a position to judge the life that someone else is creating, except insofar as they may impinge upon your freedom and your life. Søren Kierkegaard talked a lot about inwardness. How can you possibly judge another person? You can't experience their inwardness. You may have all the trappings of an important, meaningful life, while this person you're looking down on, who has none of that ostentation, nevertheless may have an inwardness that is far more profound than your own. In Japanese Buddhism, Jodo Shinshu, Pure Land Buddhism, there's a word for that, myokonin, which means basically a lotus person. Lotus is in the mud, but it blooms beautifully, right? So, how can I look down on you because you're in the mud? You may have within, a lotus that's going to bloom beautifully. Or for all I know, it may be blooming already, and I just don't have the perspective to see it. Has that ever happened to you in your life? Someone surprises you, either with something they do or something they say, or whatever, and so you think, I had no idea of this profound inwardness that the person had. And yet, look. And you may be a person yourself, if you're living authentically, of whom other people will say, wow, that person had something inside that I didn't realize. But what if they don't? What if they don't recognize that? What if nobody else ever recognizes that? You're the one that has to recognize it. Authenticity is about you. Is about you subjectively embracing the meaning of your life. Okay. Now, transcending your facticity doesn't mean denying it. Doesn't mean pretending that the facticity doesn't exist. How many times has someone done something and then replied to critics by saying, don't label me? Okay, well, there's a scene in Albert Camus' The Stranger, where the protagonist is in jail because he murdered someone, and he complains about the conditions. And his jailers tell him, you're being treated the same as every prisoner. And the protagonist of the novel says, yes, but that's different. They're criminals. The jailers burst out laughing. So are you. And at that point he realizes, given the choices that I made, given what I did, yes, I am a criminal. I've never thought of how that applied to me, but actually, don't label me. Well, yeah, what if you've actually embraced an identity by what you've done? Don't call me a liar. Do you tell lies? Well, yeah. Don't call me a criminal. Do you commit crimes? Well, yeah. Well, gee, one way of committing that sort of bad faith is to pretend that you don't have a body. And that may sound a little odd, okay, but how many times do we tell ourselves, this body is just a vehicle. What I am is my transcendent mind, my soul. My stepson once said to me, well, he had an uncle. He has an uncle who is, let's say, a little unstable, and oftentimes would fly into some sort of bizarre racist fantasy. So the uncle kept saying that Asians don't have a soul. My stepson turned to me and said, "Is it true that Asians don't have a soul?" And I said, "Okay, I can't resist. I'm at a table with devout Catholics. I'm going to do it." I said, "Well, the fact is, nobody has a soul. Soul is a fiction that people made up in ancient times because they were afraid of dying and they didn't know how the brain works." Which I think, no, that's an oversimplification, of course, but it's like, yeah, you got to say your body has nothing to do with it? Or are you going to go the other way and say, my body is my whole self? Do you have integrity? Do you have meaning? Do you embrace your freedom? Hey, look at how buff I am. No, that's not what I asked you, what you've done cosmetically. The whole business of separating your body from your subjectivity is a kind of confusion, a kind of bad faith to begin with. Okay, if you really want to know who you are phenomenologically, you're going to have to be aware of your body, of your physical self, your physical facticity. You don't deny your facticity; you embrace it. But you at the same time embrace that you can transcend your facticity. As I said before, there's a difference between pretending and pretending that you're not pretending. Okay. I've gone on longer than I thought I was going to, but that's okay. The moral of the story, so to speak, is to be honest with yourself, to have the courage to embrace your freedom, and at the same time embrace your situatedness in the world. Embracing them both at once, because there is the potential for creating a life that has actual meaning. Living with your eyes wide open. Okay? Now, of course, you're living with others, and Sarda's often paraphrased from a passage in his play No Exit, Hell is Other People. You hear sometimes feminist authors now talking about the male gaze. Okay, and back in college, I had a friend who was African American. He said that there was such a thing as the white gaze. There's a certain way that white people look at you. Not everyone, but it's like you see a young black man, and boom, 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 all these other assumptions come swooping in. And then you don't really see that other person authentically at all. you engage in bad faith. You respond to this person not as who he is, but as your stereotype tells you he is. Okay, think about that in terms of colonialism. About sexism, I had a friend in college. If I didn't have so many friends in college, I wouldn't have nearly as many stories as I have to illustrate these points. But I had a friend in college who, honestly, I don't mean anything offensive by this, she honestly should look like a Barbie doll. And she was, about 6 feet tall, very statuesque, slender, very big-bosomed, blonde, long, fluffy blonde hair, very pretty. She was a pre-med student, and she was like she had a 4-point as a pre-med student. She intended to become a surgeon, which I believe she did in no short order. Okay, just boom. She was bright enough and disciplined enough. She was able to do it. And she said to me once, she said, "You wouldn't believe the Neanderthals who hit on me when I'm out and about minding my own business. And what's even more vexing is that they always assume that they're smarter than I am." Why? Well, blonde woman looks like a Barbie doll. Oh, of course, she must be a fluffhead, right? I've got all these stereotypes I'm going to just draw in. That's a kind of colonialism. It's a kind of bad faith. It's a refusal, as Simone de Beauvoir would put it, a refusal to acknowledge that that person has the same fundamental freedom to create a life that I do. You can't have it both ways. We have so many fake ideas about one another that very often we're not talking to the person who's actually there. We're talking to something in our heads. Whether it's a matter of race, gender, appearance, economic class, education. Let me give you just a glimpse of a very bad secret. In your lifetime, you will probably meet people who are not extremely well educated, but who seem to be very, very wise. I certainly have known such people. You'll also meet people who have sterling credentials and are like, are you really living in this world? I mean, really, where did you get that? Your head, Do you actually see other people? I had a friend who was one time a girlfriend who was a speech pathologist, studying speech pathology. And she said, up until I studied speech pathology, I was a real Boston snob. If you didn't sound like John Kennedy, you were mispronouncing the words. If you didn't go instead of when you said certain words, then clearly you're an inferior person. My office mate when I first started teaching was from Texas, and she very tentatively asked me questions to see if I had biases and stereotypes about people from the South. And, I rattled off the names of people who were very dear to me, who were from, places like Kentucky and Texas and so forth. And she heaved a sigh of relief, and she said, usually I have to fear, here in Massachusetts, I have to fear that if I start talking and people can hear my Texas accent, they're going to immediately stereotype me and think that I'm just absolutely dreadful. Louis Whitebeck is one of the best-known Kant scholars in writing in the English language. I heard him do a public lecture once, and he pronounced You know who Immanuel Kant is, right? One of the handful of most important philosophers in the Western tradition. Well, Liz Whitebeck always pronounced it Kant. Immanuel Kant. I thought, if you were not a world-class scholar, a lot of people sitting in this auditorium would be thinking, what an idiot, what a yokel. But of course they can't think that because, your credentials are much better than theirs. Well, what was it? Judge not, lest ye be judged, as a certain rabbi said many years ago. Part of knowing another person, respecting that person's freedom, respecting that person's personhood, will consist of listening and observing carefully and without prejudgment. Martin Buber, B-U-B-E-R, wrote a number of books, but one called I and Thou. And many people consider him an existentialist because much of what he says about human relationships sounds very much like the existentialists. Well, there's the I-thou relationship where I am relating to you as my equal. I am respecting the fact that you have a subjectivity, that you have this intrinsic condition of freedom. And then there's the I-it relationship where I'm treating you as an object. I-it. I am a person with this subjective potential for freedom. You, on the other hand, you're an object. Okay? And Sartre has said, and others have said, as soon as other people are looking at you, you realize that you get this creepy feeling that you are becoming an it to them. And that itness, if you will, being for others, is part of how you're situated in the world. Sexism, racism, colonialism, elitism, you name it. These are all things that allow you to reduce others to an it. Okay, well, if we had forever, I would have assigned Martin Buber's I and Thou and picked it up at exactly this point. But I will just leave you with questions. And okay, thanks very much for this semester.